What happens when three teenage bullies pick the wrong victim? When they chose to attack Sarah Mitchell, a quiet 15-year-old walking home from school, they had no idea they were about to face the wrath of someone trained to eliminate threats with deadly precision. Sarah's mother wasn't just any protective parent. She was Lieutenant Commander Rachel Mitchell, a decorated Navy SEAL with 12 years of combat experience. This is the true story of how one mother's military training became the ultimate defense against her daughter's attackers, and how justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. The autumn leaves crunched under Sarah Mitchell's worn sneakers as she walked the familiar path from Jefferson High School to her home on Maple Street. The October air carried a crisp bite that made her pull her jacket tighter around her small frame. At 15, Sarah was the kind of student who preferred books to parties, studying to socializing. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her gentle brown eyes reflected a wisdom beyond her years. Sarah had learned early in life to keep a low profile. Being the daughter of a military officer meant frequent moves, new schools, and the constant challenge of making friends only to leave them behind. This latest assignment had brought the Mitchell family to the small coastal town of Ocean View, Maine, where her mother had been stationed at the nearby naval facility for specialized training operations. The walk home usually took 20 minutes, a peaceful journey through tree-lined streets where she could decompress from the day's classes and think about her homework. Sarah was particularly looking forward to finishing her history report on World War II naval operations, a topic that fascinated her, partly because of stories her mother occasionally shared about her own service. Rachel Mitchell had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq as part of an elite Navy SEAL unit. She rarely talked about her missions, but Sarah had overheard enough phone conversations and seen enough commendations to understand that her mother had done things most people couldn't imagine. The walls of their modest base housing were decorated with photos of Rachel in desert camouflage, standing with her unit, her face bearing the confident expression of someone who had faced danger and emerged victorious. But Rachel had been different since returning from her last deployment 8 months ago. She was quieter, more watchful, and Sarah had noticed how her mother's eyes would scan every room upon entering, automatically identifying exits and potential threats. The transition to a training role had been difficult for someone accustomed to high-stakes missions, but Rachel was determined to provide stability for her daughter while processing her own experiences. As Sarah rounded the corner onto Elm Street, she noticed 3 figures ahead, loitering near the old oak tree that marked the halfway point of her journey home. Her stomach tightened with a familiar anxiety. She recognized them immediately: Derek Kozlov, Marcus Webb, and Tyler Chen, 3 seniors from her school who seemed to take pleasure in making life miserable for anyone they perceived as weak or different. Derek was the ringleader, a stocky 18-year-old with bleached hair and arms covered in amateur tattoos. His family had money, which seemed to give him a sense of immunity from consequences. Marcus was his loyal follower, tall and lanky with a cruel smile that never reached his eyes. Tyler was the newest addition to their group, desperate to prove himself worthy of their acceptance through increasingly aggressive behavior. Sarah had managed to avoid direct confrontation with them so far, but she had witnessed their harassment of other students. Last week, they had cornered Jamie Patterson, a shy sophomore, and forced him to eat dirt while recording it on their phones. The video had circulated through social media before being taken down, but the damage to Jamie's reputation was already done. Now, as Sarah approached, she could see them pointing in her direction and laughing. Her heart began to race, but she maintained her steady pace, hoping they would lose interest if she didn't show fear. The military discipline she had absorbed from her mother's example told her to project confidence even when she felt vulnerable. "Well, well, well," Derek called out as she drew near. "If it isn't the little soldier girl." She had learned that engaging with bullies often made situations worse. Her mother had taught her that sometimes the best strategy was strategic withdrawal, avoiding unnecessary conflict while maintaining dignity. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Marcus stepped into her path, forcing her to stop. "Don't you know it's rude to ignore people?" "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly, trying to step around him. "I just want to get home." Tyler laughed harshly. "She's sorry, guys. How sweet. Tell us, soldier girl, is it true your mommy kills people for a living?" The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had worked hard to keep her mother's military service private, knowing it would only invite unwanted attention. Somehow, they had discovered the information and decided to weaponize it against her. "She serves our country," Sarah replied, lifting her chin slightly. For a moment, pride in her mother's service overcame her fear. Derek stepped closer, his breath smelling of cigarettes and energy drinks. "Yeah? Well, she's not here to protect you now, is she?" Just a little girl walking home all alone. The situation was escalating beyond verbal harassment, and Sarah felt a chill of genuine fear run down her spine. She glanced around, hoping to see another pedestrian or a passing car, but the street was empty. Most families in this neighborhood had 2 working parents, and the elementary school had dismissed an hour earlier, leaving the area deserted. "Please," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I haven't done anything to you." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus replied, cracking his knuckles. "You think you're better than everyone else, walking around all quiet and mysterious. Time to bring you down a few notches." Tyler pulled out his phone and began recording. "This is going to be epic." Wait until everyone at school sees this. Sarah's training kicked in, not military training, but the countless safety discussions she had with her mother. Rachel had always emphasized the importance of situational awareness and trusting instincts. Right now, every instinct Sarah possessed was screaming danger. She tried to run, but Derek grabbed her backpack and yanked her backward. The force sent her stumbling into Marcus, who pushed her roughly toward Tyler. They had formed a triangle around her, cutting off any escape route. "Where do you think you're going?" Derek sneered. "We're just getting started." What happened next would be seared into Sarah's memory forever. Derek's hands closed around her throat. Not hard enough to completely cut off her breathing, but tight enough to establish dominance and fear. Marcus grabbed her arms, holding her in place while Tyler continued recording, occasionally offering suggestions for what they should do next. "This is what happens to stuck-up military brats," Derek said, his face inches from hers. "Your mummy can't fight everyone's battles for you." Sarah struggled against their grip. But at 5'4" and barely 120 pounds, she was no match for 3 athletic seniors. Panic began to set in as she realized how helpless she truly was. The pressure around her throat made it difficult to call for help, and even if she could, there was no one around to hear her. The attack continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. They took turns pushing her, grabbing at her clothes, and making increasingly threatening comments about what they planned to do. Tyler's phone captured every moment, and Sarah could already imagine the humiliation of having her victimization broadcast to her classmates. But they had made a crucial miscalculation. While tormenting Sarah, they had failed to notice the black SUV that had turned onto Elm Street and was now moving slowly in their direction. Behind the wheel sat Lieutenant Commander Rachel Mitchell, returning early from a training exercise that had been cancelled due to equipment malfunction. Rachel had been thinking about surprising Sarah with her early return, maybe taking her out for ice cream or helping with homework. As a single mother, she treasured these unexpected opportunities to spend quality time with her daughter. Military life demanded so much sacrifice, and she was always looking for ways to make up for the times when duty had kept her away from important moments in Sarah's life. But as she rounded the corner, her trained eyes immediately assessed the scene ahead. 3 larger figures surrounding a smaller one. Aggressive body language, signs of a struggle. And then recognition hit her like a lightning bolt. The smaller figure was her daughter. Every instinct Rachel had developed through years of military service activated simultaneously. Her mind shifted into the analytical mode that had kept her alive through countless dangerous situations. She assessed the threat level, calculated response options, and formulated a plan of action in the space of a heartbeat. Rachel had seen combat in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She had led rescue operations behind enemy lines, neutralized terrorist cells, and protected civilian populations from armed insurgents. But nothing in her military experience had prepared her for the surge of protective rage that filled her chest as she watched her daughter being attacked. The SUV's engine growled as Rachel pressed the accelerator, closing the distance between her vehicle and the scene of the assault. Her hands gripped the steering wheel with the same steady control she had once used to handle weapons in combat zones. Years of training had taught her to channel adrenaline into focused action rather than blind fury. As she approached, Rachel could see that Sarah was in genuine distress. Her daughter's face was red from the pressure around her throat, and tears of fear and humiliation streamed down her cheeks. The 3 attackers were so focused on their victim that they remained oblivious to the approaching vehicle. Rachel brought the SUV to a stop approximately 10 feet from the group, close enough to intervene immediately but far enough to avoid accidentally striking her daughter. She turned off the engine and sat for exactly 3 seconds, using the time to center herself and ensure that her response would be measured and effective rather than emotional and potentially excessive. When Lieutenant Commander Rachel Mitchell opened the door of her vehicle and stepped onto the asphalt of Elm Street, she was no longer just a concerned mother. She was a highly trained special operations professional who had identified a threat to a civilian under her protection. The transformation was complete, visible in her posture, her movement, and the cold calculation in her eyes. The three attackers were about to learn that their choice of victim had been the biggest mistake of their lives. Derek was the first to notice the newcomer. He looked up from Sarah, probably expecting to see a neighbor who could be intimidated into minding their own business. Instead, he found himself staring at a woman who moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. Rachel was 30, 8 years old, 5'8", with the lean muscle definition that came from years of military fitness requirements. Her brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and she wore the digital camouflage uniform of her service branch. But it was her eyes that truly announced her identity. Cold, analytical, and completely devoid of fear. "Step away from my daughter," Rachel said, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she had used to command troops in combat zones. "Now." For a moment, nobody moved. Derek's hands were still around Sarah's throat, Marcus still gripped her arms, and Tyler continued recording, though his phone was beginning to shake in his suddenly unsteady hands. "I said step away," Rachel repeated, taking 2 measured steps forward. "This is your only warning." The teenagers finally began to grasp that they were no longer dealing with a helpless victim. Derek released his grip on Sarah's throat but didn't back away entirely, his ego preventing him from immediately surrendering his position of dominance. "Hey lady," he said, trying to inject confidence into his voice. "This isn't your business. We're just having a conversation with your daughter here." Rachel's expression didn't change, but something in her stance shifted slightly. Sarah, who knew her mother better than anyone, recognized the subtle sign. Rachel was transitioning from warning to action mode. "The conversation is over," Rachel stated flatly. "Release her immediately, or I will make you release her." Marcus, apparently the smartest of the three, let go of Sarah's arms and took a step backward. But Derek, emboldened by Tyler's continued recording and perhaps believing that the presence of a camera would protect him from retaliation, doubled down on his aggression. "Or what?" he challenged, puffing out his chest. "You gonna fight all 3 of us?" "We're not afraid of some army mom." Rachel almost smiled at the irony of being called Army Mom when her actual designation was considerably more specialized. But humor was a luxury she couldn't afford while her daughter remained in immediate danger. What happened next would become the stuff of local legend, recounted in whispered conversations for years to come. Rachel Mitchell demonstrated exactly why she had earned her place among the military's elite forces, and 3 teenage bullies learned a lesson they would never forget. The first move happened so quickly that Tyler almost dropped his phone. Rachel covered the distance between herself and Derek in 2 fluid steps, her military boots making no sound on the pavement. Years of hand-to-hand combat training had taught her that speed and precision were more effective than brute force, especially when dealing with multiple opponents. Derek barely had time to register her movement before Rachel's left hand clamped down on his wrist with crushing force, applying pressure to specific nerve points that immediately caused his grip on Sarah to weaken. Simultaneously, her right hand struck his elbow with surgical precision, hyperextending the joint just enough to cause intense pain without permanent damage. Derek cried out and instinctively pulled away, finally releasing Sarah completely. But Rachel wasn't finished with him yet. As he stumbled backward, she pivoted and swept his legs with her right foot, sending him crashing to the ground with a technique she had learned during urban warfare training in Fallujah. The entire sequence took less than 5 seconds. Marcus and Tyler stood frozen, their brains struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The confident woman in military fatigues had neutralized their leader with an efficiency that belonged in action movies, not on a quiet suburban street in Maine. "Sarah, get behind me!" Rachel commanded without taking her eyes off the remaining threats. Her daughter quickly obeyed, moving to position herself safely behind her mother's protective stance. Derek groaned from the ground, clutching his injured arm. He had landed hard on the asphalt, scraping his palms and jarring his spine. The pain was unlike anything he had experienced before. Precise, debilitating, and completely under Rachel's control. "My arm," he whimpered. "I think you broke my arm." Rachel looked down at him with the same clinical detachment she had once reserved for enemy combatants. "It's not broken," she said matter-of-factly, "but it will be extremely painful for several days. Consider it a learning experience." Tyler finally found his voice, though it came out as a high-pitched squeak. "You can't just attack us." "We're minors. This is assault." Rachel turned her attention to the boy with the phone, her expression unchanging. "You recorded yourselves choking my daughter and holding her against her will. That's assault, kidnapping, and criminal intimidation. What I just did falls under the legal definition of defending another person from imminent harm." Marcus, who had been slowly backing away during this exchange, suddenly turned and ran. His survival instincts had finally overridden his loyalty to Derek, and he sprinted down Elm Street as fast as his legs could carry him. Rachel watched him go but made no move to pursue him. Her primary objective was ensuring Sarah's safety, not apprehending all the perpetrators. Tyler looked between his fallen friend and the intimidating woman who stood over him, clearly debating whether to follow Marcus's example. His phone was still recording, though his hands were shaking so badly that the video was probably unusable. "Turn off the recording," Rachel instructed. "Delete the video of my daughter and any other videos you may have taken of her." I don't know how to delete it," Tyler stammered, which was obviously a lie. Rachel stepped toward him, closing the distance by half. Her movement was controlled and deliberate, but Tyler flinched, as if she had raised her hand to strike him. "I'm going to give you exactly 10 seconds to figure it out," she said calmly. "After that, I'm going to assume you're choosing to keep evidence of your crimes against my daughter, and I will respond accordingly." Tyler's fingers flew across his phone screen, desperately navigating through menus and folders. The fear in his eyes was genuine. He had never encountered anyone who projected such quiet, controlled menace. Every instinct he possessed was screaming that this woman was far more dangerous than she appeared. "There," he said, showing her the deleted video. "It's gone, I swear." Rachel examined the phone screen briefly, then nodded. "Now show me your cloud storage and your social media accounts. If I discover that any footage of this incident has been uploaded anywhere, I will find you." The threat was delivered in the same conversational tone Rachel might have used to discuss the weather, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying than if she had shouted. Tyler quickly demonstrated that no videos had been uploaded, his hands trembling as he navigated through various apps and accounts. Derek had managed to sit up, though he was still cradling his injured arm. The initial shock was wearing off, and his natural arrogance was beginning to reassert itself. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he snarled. "Wait until my dad hears about this. He's a lawyer. He'll sue you for everything you're worth." Rachel turned back to him with what might have been amusement flickering in her eyes. "Your father is Robert Kozloff of Kozloff, Harrison and Associates?" Derek blinked in surprise. "How did you know that?" "I make it my business to know about potential threats to my family," Rachel replied, "including the fact that your father specializes in maritime law and real estate transactions, not criminal defense. Also that he's currently under investigation by the State Bar Association for misappropriating client funds." The color drained from Derek's face. How could this woman know such specific details about his family's legal troubles, information that was supposed to be confidential? Rachel continued in her calm, measured tone. "But more importantly, any competent attorney would advise you that filing charges against someone who was defending their child from assault would be inadvisable, especially when there are witnesses and evidence of your criminal behavior." She gestured toward a house across the street, where an elderly woman stood at her front window, clearly having witnessed the entire incident. The woman waved when she realized Rachel had noticed her, then disappeared from view, probably to call the police. "Mrs. Henderson has been watching this whole time," Rachel explained. "She's a retired school principal with an excellent memory and no tolerance for bullies. I suspect her testimony would be very unfavorable to your version of events." Tyler was still standing nearby, uncertain whether he was free to leave or if movement might trigger another demonstration of Rachel's combat skills. His phone hung limply in his hand, and he seemed to be experiencing the kind of shock that comes from having one's worldview completely shattered. "Here's what's going to happen," Rachel announced, addressing both remaining teenagers. "You're going to walk away from here. You're never going to approach my daughter again. You're never going to speak to her, look at her, or acknowledge her existence in any way. If you see her in the hallway at school, you will take a different route. If you're assigned to the same class, you will request a transfer." Derek started to protest, but Rachel cut him off with a raised hand. "I'm not finished," she said. "Furthermore, if I hear about either of you harassing any other student at Jefferson High School, I will consider it a personal affront. And trust me when I tell you that you do not want to personally affront someone with my particular skill set." Tyler nodded vigorously, eager to agree to any terms that would get him away from this terrifying situation. Derek was more resistant, his pride still smarting from being so thoroughly dominated by a woman half his size. "You can't threaten us," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "This is America. We have rights." Rachel smiled for the first time since arriving on the scene, but it was not a warm expression. "You absolutely have rights. You have the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, the right to medical treatment for your injuries, but you do not have the right to assault teenage girls without consequences. In the distance, the sound of sirens could be heard approaching. Mrs. Henderson had indeed called the police, and Ocean View's finest were responding to a report of an assault in progress. "Perfect timing," Rachel observed. "Now you'll have the opportunity to explain to Officer Martinez exactly what you were doing with your hands around my daughter's throat." Derek's face went pale as he realized the full implications of his situation. Being arrested for assault would mean involvement from the juvenile justice system, notification of school administrators, and inevitable exposure to his parents. His father's legal troubles would only be compounded by having a son charged with violent crimes. "Wait," he said quickly. "Maybe we can work something out. I mean, we were just fooling around. Sarah knows we were just kidding, right?" All eyes turned to Sarah, who had been silent throughout her mother's intervention. She was still shaken by the attack, but the presence of her mother had restored her sense of safety and given her the courage to speak. "They choked me," she said quietly but clearly. Derek put his hands around my throat and squeezed until I couldn't breathe properly. Marcus held my arms so I couldn't get away. "They said they were going to do worse things and recorded to humiliate me at school." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, the protective presence of her mother giving her the confidence to tell the truth without fear. "This wasn't the first time they've hurt other students. Last week they made Jamie Patterson eat dirt and filmed it. They've been threatening kids and posting videos online for months." Derek looked desperately between Sarah and the approaching police car. His carefully constructed narrative of innocent horseplay was crumbling in the face of his victim's clear, detailed testimony. Tyler suddenly found his voice again. "Derek made us do it," he blurted out. "It was all his idea. He said we had to prove we weren't scared of some military kid." The betrayal was swift and complete. Faced with the prospect of serious legal consequences, Tyler immediately abandoned any loyalty to his former leader. Marcus had already fled the scene, and now Tyler was eager to distance himself from Derek's decision-making. Rachel observed this development with professional interest. She had seen similar scenarios play out in interrogation situations overseas, where faced with consequences, criminal organizations would quickly fracture along lines of self-preservation. The police cruiser pulled up beside them, and Officer Carlos Martinez stepped out. He was a veteran of the Ocean View police force, a man in his early 50s who had dealt with countless domestic disputes, teenage mischief, and occasional serious crimes, but he had never responded to a call involving a Navy SEAL and 3 teenage assailants. "Good afternoon," he said, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. Derek sitting on the ground nursing an injured arm. Tyler standing nervously with his phone, Rachel in military uniform maintaining a protective position over her daughter, and Sarah showing signs of having been in an altercation. "Officer Martinez," Rachel acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Lieutenant Commander Rachel Mitchell, United States Navy. These 3 individuals assaulted my daughter approximately 10 minutes ago. The victim and several witnesses can provide detailed statements." Martinez had known Rachel by reputation since her arrival in Ocean View. The local law enforcement community was small and tight-knit, and word had spread quickly about the decorated SEAL who had been assigned to the nearby training facility. He had never interacted with her personally, but he had heard nothing but positive reports about her professionalism and community involvement. "Are you injured, miss?" Martinez asked Sarah, directing his attention to the actual victim of the reported crime. Sarah touched her throat gingerly. There were faint red marks where Derek's fingers had pressed into her skin, and her voice was slightly hoarse when she spoke. "My throat hurts and my arms are sore where they grabbed me," she reported. "But I think I'm okay. My mum got here before they could do anything worse." Martinez made notes in his incident report book, then turned to Derek. "What's your name, son?" "Derek Kozlov." The teenager replied sullenly, "And I want to call my father. This woman attacked me without provocation." "That's interesting," Martinez said dryly, "because Mrs. Henderson called in a report of 3 young men assaulting a girl. She's been watching from her window and saw the whole thing." Derek's story was beginning to unravel even faster than he had anticipated. The presence of an independent witness meant that his word against Rachel and Sarah's wouldn't be sufficient to create reasonable doubt about what had occurred. Tyler, meanwhile, was desperately trying to position himself as a reluctant participant rather than an active perpetrator. "Officer, I just recorded it. I didn't actually touch her. Derek and Marcus were the ones who grabbed her." "You recorded an assault and did nothing to stop it?" Martinez asked, his tone sharpening. "That makes you an accessory to the crime, son. And where is this Marcus person?" "He ran away when Sarah's mom showed up," Tyler admitted, apparently not realizing that his statement further undermined Derek's claim that they had been engaged in innocent activity. Rachel had remained silent during these exchanges, allowing the police officer to conduct his investigation without interference. Her military training had taught her to respect the chain of command and proper procedures, even in civilian law enforcement situations. But she was also carefully observing the questioning, ready to provide additional information if needed. Years of experience in hostile environments had made her an expert at reading people's motivations and predicting their likely actions. Martinez completed his initial interviews with all parties present, then radioed for additional units to search for Marcus Webb. Mrs. Dear Henderson emerged from her house to provide her eyewitness testimony, confirming every detail of Sarah's account of the assault. Based on the evidence and witness statements, Martinez announced, "I'm placing Derek Kozlov and Tyler Chen under arrest for assault, unlawful restraint, and intimidation. All his life he had relied on his family's money and influence to shield him from serious consequences. Teachers overlooked his disruptions, coaches ignored his poor sportsmanship, and administrators dismissed complaints about his behavior as teenage pranks. But assault charges were different. They couldn't be dismissed with a donation to the school athletic program or smoothed over with a phone call from his father's law firm. This was the criminal justice system, and it operated by different rules than the social hierarchies Derek was accustomed to manipulating." Tyler broke down completely, tears streaming down his face as Martinez read them their rights. The reality of arrest, criminal charges, and potential juvenile detention had shattered his teenage sense of invincibility. "Please," he sobbed. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Derek made us do it. He said if we didn't help him, he'd post embarrassing videos of us online." This revelation added another layer to the case. If Derek had been coercing other students into participating in his harassment campaigns, it suggested a pattern of criminal behavior that went far beyond a single incident. Rachel made a mental note to follow up on Tyler's claim. If Derek had been systematically intimidating students into participating in abuse, there might be other victims who had been afraid to come forward. Sarah's case could be the key to exposing a much larger problem at Jefferson High School. As Martinez placed handcuffs on both teenagers, Derek made one final attempt to assert control over the situation. "You haven't heard the last of this," he snarled at Rachel. "My family has connections. We'll make your life hell." Rachel regarded him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the encounter. "Mr. Kozlov, I've been shot at by trained terrorists, bombed by insurgents, and threatened by some of the most dangerous people on Earth. A spoiled teenager from coastal Maine doesn't register as a significant concern." Her response was delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence that Derek seemed to deflate completely. For the first time, he appeared to truly understand that he had chosen the wrong target for his aggression. Officer Martinez loaded both teenagers into the back of his patrol car, then returned to speak with Rachel and Sarah. "I'll need you both to come to the station to file formal statements. The district attorney will probably want to interview you as well." "Of course," Rachel agreed. "We're fully prepared to cooperate with the investigation and prosecution." As the police car pulled away, carrying Derek and Tyler toward an encounter with the juvenile justice system, Rachel finally allowed herself to focus entirely on her daughter's well-being. The immediate threat had been neutralized. The legal process was in motion, and now it was time for the more important work of helping Sarah process what had happened to her.
"Are you sure you're not seriously hurt?" she asked, gently examining the marks on Sarah's throat.
"I'm okay," Sarah replied, though her voice was still shaky. "Mum, I was so scared. I thought they were going to really hurt me." Rachel pulled her daughter into a protective embrace, feeling the full weight of what could have happened if she hadn't arrived when she did. For all her military training and combat experience, nothing had prepared her for the rage and fear that came with seeing her child in danger. The weeks following the arrest of Derek Kozlov and Tyler Chen brought dramatic changes to Jefferson High School and the wider Ocean View community. What had started as a simple case of teenage bullying had evolved into something much larger, exposing systemic problems that had been festering beneath the surface for years. Sarah returned to school 3 days after the attack, accompanied by her mother for a meeting with Principal Janet Morrison and the school counselor, Mrs. Rebecca Thompson. The administrative response was swift and comprehensive, driven partly by genuine concern for student safety and partly by fear of potential liability issues. "We had no idea the situation had escalated to this level," Principal Morrison explained, reviewing thick files that contained dozens of incident reports involving Derek and his associates. There were complaints, but they were typically classified as minor bullying incidents or personality conflicts. Rachel examined the paperwork with the analytical eye of someone trained in intelligence gathering. The pattern that emerged was disturbing but predictable. Derek's behavior had been escalating for months, but each individual incident had been treated as an isolated event rather than part of a larger campaign of intimidation. This report from October 2nd describes Derek forcing a student to give him lunch money, Rachel noted. 3 days later, there's another report of him destroying someone's homework. A week after that, he was caught pushing a freshman into a locker. She looked up at Principal Morrison with barely concealed frustration. These aren't isolated incidents. This is a clear pattern of predatory behavior that should have triggered intervention months ago. Mrs. Thompson, a well-meaning woman in her 50s who had been the school counselor for nearly 20 years, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Well, we did try to address Derek's behavior through counseling sessions and detention. His parents were notified multiple times. And what was their response? Rachel asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Kozlov typically claimed that Derek was being unfairly targeted due to his family's prominence in the community, Morrison admitted. He threatened to file discrimination complaints if we took more serious disciplinary action. Rachel nodded grimly. She had encountered similar situations during her military service, where individuals used their connections or perceived status to avoid accountability for their actions. The difference was that in military settings, such behavior was dealt with swiftly and decisively. What's being done now to ensure this doesn't happen to other students? Sarah asked quietly. It was the first time she had spoken during the meeting, and her question cut straight to the heart of the matter. Principal Morrison outlined a comprehensive plan that had been developed in consultation with the school district's legal department. Derek and Tyler would face immediate expulsion proceedings, regardless of the outcome of their criminal cases. Marcus Webb, who had been apprehended the previous day, would also face serious disciplinary action. More importantly, the school was implementing new policies designed to identify and address bullying behavior before it escalated to criminal levels. Anonymous reporting systems, mandatory training for staff members, and regular surveys of student experiences were all part of the new approach. We're also bringing in a consultant who specializes in school safety and anti-bullying programs, Mrs. Thompson added. Your daughter's experience has opened our eyes to some serious gaps in our current system. While these changes were encouraging, Rachel knew that bureaucratic reforms would take time to implement effectively. Her immediate concern was ensuring that Sarah felt safe returning to her normal routine. The criminal case against Derek and Tyler was progressing through the juvenile justice system with unusual speed. District Attorney Patricia Walsh had decided to treat the case as a high-priority prosecution, partly because of the severity of the assault, and partly because evidence suggested that Derek had been operating what amounted to a criminal organization within the school. Tyler's cooperation with investigators had revealed the existence of dozens of videos stored on Derek's personal devices, documenting months of harassment and abuse directed at various students. The discovery transformed what might have been a simple assault case into a complex investigation involving multiple victims and charges. Derek wasn't just a bully, Detective Lisa Rodriguez explained during a follow-up interview with Rachel and Sarah. He was running a systematic campaign of intimidation designed to establish dominance over other students. The videos were trophies, evidence of his power over his victims. The scope of Derek's criminal behavior was staggering. In addition to the assault on Sarah, investigators had uncovered evidence of theft, extortion, cyberbullying, and sexual harassment. Several younger students came forward to report incidents they had previously been too afraid to discuss. Jamie Patterson, the sophomore who had been forced to eat dirt, broke down during his interview and revealed that Derek had been extorting money from him for weeks. Another victim, a freshman named Angela Martinez, described being cornered in an empty classroom and subjected to inappropriate touching while Tyler recorded the encounter. These kids were terrorized, Detective Rodriguez continued. They were too scared to report what was happening because Derek had convinced them that no one would believe them or that reporting him would only make things worse. Rachel felt a familiar anger building in her chest as she listened to the detective's findings. It was the same cold fury she had experienced in combat zones when confronted with individuals who preyed on the innocent and defenseless. What happens now? She asked. Derek is being charged as an adult due to the severity and repetitive nature of his crimes, Rodriguez explained. The district attorney believes she can make a case for him being tried for organized criminal activity. If convicted, he's looking at significant prison time, not just juvenile detention. Tyler's situation was more complicated. His cooperation with the investigation had earned him some consideration, but he was still facing serious charges for his role in multiple incidents. The fact that he had recorded many of the assaults made him a co-conspirator rather than merely a witness. Tyler seems genuinely remorseful, Rodriguez noted. But remorse doesn't erase the fact that he actively participated in terrorizing his classmates. The victims deserve justice, not just apologies. As the legal process continued, the impact of Sarah's case began to ripple through the broader community. Local news outlets picked up the story, focusing on the dramatic intervention by the Navy SEAL mother and the subsequent revelations about systematic bullying at the high school. The coverage brought both positive and negative attention to the Mitchell family. Supporters praised Rachel's actions and called for more decisive responses to school violence. Critics questioned whether her military training had led to an excessive use of force against teenagers. Some people are saying you could have handled it differently, Sarah mentioned one evening as they watched the local news together. They think you should have called the police instead of getting physical. Rachel considered her response carefully. This was an important teaching moment for her daughter, an opportunity to discuss the complex realities of self-defense and protection of others. There's always criticism when someone takes decisive action, she said. But you were in immediate danger. Those boys had their hands around your throat and were threatening to do worse. In that situation, waiting for police to arrive wasn't an option. She paused to mute the television, giving her full attention to the conversation. I used the minimum force necessary to stop the threat to your safety, she continued. Derek's injuries were minor and temporary. The alternative might have been much worse for you. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Living with a mother who had served in combat zones had given her a more realistic understanding of violence than most teenagers possessed. She knew that sometimes good people had to do difficult things to protect others from harm. I'm proud of what you did, she said quietly. And I'm proud to be your daughter. The sentiment meant more to Rachel than any military commendation she had ever received. Protecting her daughter had been instinctive, but knowing that Sarah understood and supported her actions provided validation that went beyond legal or social approval. The trial of Derek Kozlov began 6 months after the assault on Sarah. By that time, the case had grown to include 17 separate charges and testimony from 12 different victims. What had started as a single incident had exposed a pattern of criminal behavior that shocked even experienced prosecutors. Derek's defense attorney attempted to portray his client as a troubled teenager who had gotten caught up in peer pressure and social media culture. The strategy might have worked in a simpler case, but the overwhelming evidence of systematic abuse made it impossible to sustain. Tyler Chen had accepted a plea agreement in exchange for his testimony against Derek. He received 18 months in juvenile detention plus 3 years of probation, during which time he would be required to participate in counseling and community service programs. Marcus Webb, who had fled the scene during Rachel's intervention, was also cooperating with prosecutors. His testimony provided crucial details about Derek's methods of recruiting accomplices and maintaining control over his victims through threats and intimidation. Derek told us that if we didn't do what he said, he would make our lives at school unbearable. Marcus testified during the trial. He showed us videos of what happened to kids who crossed him. We were scared of him too. The prosecution painted a picture of Derek as a calculating predator who had used fear and manipulation to create his own criminal organization within the school environment. The videos found on his devices served as powerful evidence of his systematic approach to victimization. Rachel and Sarah both testified about the events of that October afternoon, providing clear, detailed accounts that corroborated the physical evidence and witness statements. Sarah's testimony was particularly compelling, as she described not just the assault itself, but the months of fear and intimidation that had preceded it. I was afraid to walk home from school, she told the jury. I was afraid to eat lunch alone. I was afraid to go to the bathroom between classes because I never knew where Derek and his friends might be waiting. Her words captured the psychological impact of Derek's campaign in a way that incident reports and police statements could not. The jury could see clearly how systematic bullying had robbed a bright, capable teenager of her sense of safety and belonging at school. The defense's attempts to discredit Rachel's testimony backfired spectacularly. Derek's attorney suggested that her military background had made her overly aggressive and prone to violence, implying that she had overreacted to a harmless teenage prank. The prosecution responded by calling character witnesses who testified to Rachel's professionalism, integrity, and commitment to protecting others. Her commanding officer provided detailed testimony about her exemplary service record and her reputation for measured, appropriate responses to threats. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell is exactly the kind of person you want protecting your community, testified Captain James Rodriguez. She has faced genuine threats to national security with remarkable composure and judgment. The suggestion that she would overreact to a situation involving her daughter's safety is inconsistent with everything I know about her character. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Derek was sentenced to 8 years in adult prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 5 years. The judge specifically noted that the systematic nature of his crimes and his lack of genuine remorse had influenced the severity of the sentence. Kozlov, You created a reign of terror within your school community. Judge Patricia Williams stated during sentencing, "Your victims were children who should have been able to focus on their education and personal development, instead of worrying about when you might next target them for abuse." She continued, addressing Derek directly, "Your actions caused real and lasting harm to multiple young people. Some of your victims are still receiving counseling for the trauma you inflicted. This court will not treat such behavior as typical teenage misconduct." The conviction sent shockwaves through the local community and beyond. News of the case spread through social media and national news outlets, sparking conversations about bullying, school safety, and the appropriate response to threats against children. For Sarah, the conclusion of the legal proceedings marked the end of a difficult chapter, but also the beginning of new opportunities. Her courage in testifying had inspired other students to come forward about their own experiences with bullying and harassment. She became involved in peer counseling programs at school and worked with administrators to develop more effective reporting systems for students experiencing harassment. Her experience as a victim had given her unique insights into the psychology of bullying and the barriers that prevented many students from seeking help. Sarah has become a real leader in our anti-bullying efforts, Principal Morrison noted during a school board meeting 6 months after the trial. Her willingness to share her story and help other students has been instrumental in changing our school culture. Rachel, meanwhile, had received recognition from both military and civilian authorities for her actions that October afternoon. The Navy awarded her a commendation for exemplary conduct in protecting a civilian from assault, and the local police department presented her with a Citizens Award for her assistance in a criminal investigation. But the recognition that meant the most came from the families of Derek's other victims. Parents who had watched their children suffer in silence thanked her for taking the action that finally brought their children's tormentor to justice. "My son was too scared to tell us what Derek was doing to him," one mother wrote in a letter to Rachel. "If you hadn't stopped Derek when you did, I don't know how much longer my child would have suffered. You gave him his life back." The case also led to broader changes in how the Ocean View School District handled bullying incidents. New policies required more thorough investigation of complaints, mandatory reporting of certain types of harassment, and regular training for staff members on recognizing signs of systematic abuse. Most importantly, the district implemented programs designed to empower students to report threats and harassment without fear of retaliation. Anonymous reporting systems, peer mediation programs, and regular surveys helped create an environment where victims felt safer coming forward. 1 year after the assault, Sarah had not only recovered from her traumatic experience, but had become stronger and more confident as a result of overcoming it. She maintained excellent grades, participated in student government, and had developed friendships with classmates who admired her courage and integrity. "I think about that day sometimes," she reflected during a conversation with her mother. "Not the scary parts, but how it felt when you showed up. I knew I was safe because you were there. I knew that no matter what happened, you would protect me." Rachel smiled at her daughter's words, remembering the fierce protectiveness that had driven her actions that afternoon. Military training had given her the skills to neutralize the threat, but it was love for her child that had provided the motivation. "That's what parents do," she replied simply. "We protect our children. Sometimes that means helping with homework or driving to soccer practice. Sometimes it means facing down bullies who think they can hurt the people we love." The story of Lieutenant Commander Rachel Mitchell and her daughter Sarah became something of a legend in Ocean View and beyond. It was told as an example of what could happen when predators chose the wrong victim, when systematic abuse was finally exposed to consequences, and when trained professionals stood up for the innocent and defenseless. But for Rachel and Sarah, it was simply the story of a family that refused to be victimized, a mother who would do anything to protect her child, and a daughter who found the courage to help other victims find their voices. Derek Kozlov remained in prison, his appeals having been unsuccessful. Tyler Chen completed his juvenile detention sentence and was reportedly doing well in a new school district, having learned from his mistakes and committed himself to making amends for his past actions. The other victims of Derek's campaign had also moved forward with their lives, supported by counseling services and the knowledge that their tormentor could no longer hurt them or anyone else. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had witnessed the assault and called police, became something of a local celebrity for her role in ensuring that justice was served. She often spoke at community meetings about the importance of citizen involvement in protecting neighborhood children, and on quiet afternoons, when Sarah walked home from Jefferson High School, she did so with confidence and peace of mind. The path that had once been fraught with danger had become simply a pleasant journey through tree-lined streets, exactly as it should be for any teenager in a safe, caring community. The legacy of that October afternoon lived on in the improved policies at Jefferson High School, in the courage of students who now felt empowered to report harassment, and in the knowledge that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected sources. Rachel Mitchell had served her country with honor in distant combat zones, but her most important mission had been protecting her daughter on a quiet street in coastal Maine. It was a mission she had completed with the same skill, courage, and determination that had made her an elite warrior. For Sarah, the experience had been traumatic, but ultimately transformative. She had learned that even in her darkest moments she was not alone. She had a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect her, and she lived in a community that would ultimately choose justice over convenience when the truth was finally revealed. The story ended not with revenge or vigilante justice, but with the rule of law prevailing, victims finding their voices, and a family growing stronger through adversity. It was a reminder that courage comes in many forms, that training and preparation matter when crisis strikes, and that sometimes the best defense against bullying and intimidation is simply someone willing to stand up and say enough.